The first thing you should know about Xathoria is that everything smells like burning oil and fermented cabbage. It's not the kind of place you'd vacation, unless your idea of a good time involves dodging plasma blasts from trigger-happy bounty hunters in a backwater spaceport that makes the worst parts of Earth look like luxury resorts. And yet, there I was, Derek Vance, Earth Alliance diplomat, nursing a glass of something that tasted like battery acid, mixed with cinnamon at a dive called the Rusted Rocket. The barkeeper, a six-armed Krellian with skin like corroded copper, kept eyeing me suspiciously. I couldn't blame him. Humans weren't exactly common on the Outer Rim planets, especially ones in tailored diplomatic uniforms. "Your drink is getting warm," said a low, melodic voice beside me. "That is considered disrespectful to the establishment." I turned to see my assigned bodyguard, Kyra Valshin, towering over me, even seated on a bar stool. I had to crane my neck to meet her eyes. She was Vexari, one of the most feared warrior races in the galaxy. Her smoky, purple skin gleamed in the bar's dim light, and the articulated armor she wore hummed with subtle energy. Most distinctive was the heart-shaped ventilation port at her chest, a design quirk that always struck me as oddly feminine for battle armor. "Sorry," I muttered, downing the vile concoction in one gulp. It burned all the way down. "Remind me again why we're meeting mineral contractors in a place that looks like it hosts a murder every hour?" Kiera's face remained impassive. "The Xathoria Provincial Council believes neutral territory avoids the appearance of favoritism. This establishment qualifies as neutral." I snorted. "It qualifies as a health hazard." 3 standard Earth days earlier, I'd been briefed on what should have been a straightforward mission: negotiate mining rights on Xathoria's eastern continent, secure favorable terms for Earth Alliance companies, smile for the hollow recorders, and head home. Simple diplomatic work, the kind I'd done a dozen times before. What they hadn't mentioned was the planet's political instability, or that I'd be assigned a 7-foot-tall Vexari warrior as my personal shadow. Kiera had barely spoken 10 sentences to me since our introduction. She moved with liquid grace despite her size and armor, constantly scanning our surroundings, her hand never far from the plasma blade at her hip. The Vexari were legendary for their combat prowess and code of honor. And if the stories were true, Kiera could probably kill everyone in this bar without breaking a sweat. "The contractors are late," I said, checking my communicator. 43 minutes late, actually." "Patience is a virtue even humans should cultivate," Kiera replied. I was about to snap back with something witty when the bar's grimy entrance slid open with a metallic groan. 3 figures stepped inside, not our mining contractors, but trouble. Even I could tell that much from their posture and the way the room suddenly went quiet. They wore mismatched Krellian combat armor, heavily modified with additional plating and weapon holsters. Bounty hunters, or mercenaries. My diplomatic training kicked in, assessing threats, cataloging exits. I'd been in tense situations before, but usually with a security detail, not just one alien bodyguard, however fearsome. "Stay calm," Kiera whispered, her voice barely audible. "Do not make eye contact." Too late. The leader of the trio, a scarred Krellian with a cybernetic eye implant, was already looking directly at me. His mechanical eye whirred as it focused, and a grin spread across his leathery face. Well, he growled in accented common. "What are the odds? A human diplomat, here, of all places." The bar patrons began sliding away from us, clearing a danger zone. I kept my expression neutral, the way they teach you in diplomatic corps training. "Evening, gentlemen," I said evenly. "Can I buy you a drink?" The leader laughed, a harsh sound like grinding metal. "Oh, we're not here for drinks, Earthman. We're here for the Proxima code. Hand it over nice and easy. And maybe we won't have to redecorate this establishment with your internal organs." I blinked in genuine confusion. "The what?" Kiera shifted beside me, her stance widening imperceptibly. I could feel tension radiating from her like heat from a reactor core. "Playing dumb won't help you," the hunter continued, his hand drifting toward his sidearm. "We know you're carrying it, so let's not make this messy." What happened next occurred so quickly that my human eyes could barely track it. Kiera moved like liquid lightning, flipping our table upward as a shield just as the bounty hunter drew his weapon. The air crackled with plasma discharge as his shot went wide, scorching the ceiling. I tumbled backward off my stool, years of training kicking in despite my diplomatic position. "Stay down!" Kira commanded, her plasma blade igniting with a sizzling hiss. Its violet glow cast eerie shadows across her face as she deflected another shot. The bar erupted into chaos. Patrons dived for cover or bolted for the exits. The other two bounty hunters spread out, weapons drawn, trying to flank us. I crawled behind the overturned table, drawing my own diplomatic issue stunner, a pathetic defense against military-grade weapons. But better than nothing. "What the hell is a Proxima code?" I shouted to Kira over the din. She ducked a plasma bolt that melted a hole in the wall behind her. "Not now. Human!" I risked a peek around the table edge and fired my stunner at the nearest hunter. The bolt connected, but his armor absorbed most of the charge. He staggered, then snarled and aimed directly at me. Before he could fire, something unexpected happened. A blast from across the room caught him squarely in the chest, throwing him backward into the bar. I glanced toward the source and saw a draconian traitor I'd noticed earlier, now wielding dual pulse pistols with surprising expertise for a merchant. "Behind you!" the draconian shouted. I rolled instinctively as plasma scorched the floor where I'd been kneeling. Rising to a crouch, I fired again, this time aiming for an unarmored joint in the hunter's gear. He howled as the stun charge found its mark, his leg buckling beneath him. Meanwhile, Kiera was engaged in a deadly dance with the leader. Her plasma blade hummed through the air as she parried his shots and closed the distance between them. When she reached him, the fight became brutally one-sided. The Vexari moved with practiced precision, disarming him with a twist of her blade before delivering a crushing blow to his sternum that sent him sprawling. "We need to leave," she announced, grabbing my arm and pulling me toward a service corridor I hadn't noticed before. Now. The draconian who had helped us was already heading in the same direction. "Follow me," he hissed, his scaled skin reflecting the emergency lights that had begun flashing. "I have transport nearby." "Why should we trust you?" I demanded as Kira pulled me along. "Because I'm not shooting at you," he replied with a toothy grin. "And because I hate the hegemony more than I hate humans, or Vexari." We burst through the service exit into a narrow alley that reeked of waste and industrial chemicals. In the distance, I could hear the wail of security sirens, local law enforcement. Probably too little, too late. The draconian led us through a maze of back alleys, eventually emerging at a small landing pad where a battered but serviceable short-range shuttle waited. It wasn't much to look at, all patched hull plates and mismatched engine components. But it was our best option. "Get in," he instructed, slapping the entry panel. The hatch hissed open, revealing a cramped but functional interior. "My name's Draxus, by the way. Usually charge for transport, but first one's free for enemies of my enemies." Kiera pushed me inside before I could respond, then followed, her tall frame having to duck under the low ceiling. Draxus jumped into the pilot's seat and began the startup sequence with practiced efficiency. "Where are you taking us?" I asked as the engines rumbled to life. "Somewhere those hunters won't follow," Draxus replied, his clawed fingers dancing across the controls. "Abandoned mining facility in the foothills. Radiation signature masks life signs. Perfect hiding spot." The shuttle lifted off with a lurch just as figures appeared at the entrance to the alley. More bounty hunters, I assumed. Plasma fire lit up the night behind us as we accelerated away from the spaceport, banking sharply to avoid the taller buildings. "So," I said, turning to Kira once we were safely airborne. "Want to tell me what a Proxima code is, and why those guys think I have it?" Kira's expression remained stoic, but I noticed a subtle shift in her skin tone, a darker purple, almost indigo around her neck and face. Among Vexari, I knew this indicated concern or tension. "The Proxima code is a highly classified piece of military technology," she explained after a moment. "A decryption key that can bypass Alliance and Vexari security protocols alike. If it fell into the wrong hands, it would be very bad," Draxus finished from the cockpit. "Worth a fortune to the right buyer, like the Hegemony." I frowned. The Hegemony, a coalition of expansionist planets on the far side of the galaxy, had been pushing against Alliance and Vexari borders for decades. But open conflict had been avoided through careful diplomacy. If they acquired a means to breach security systems. "But I don't have this code," I insisted. "I'm just here for mining negotiations." Kira's eyes narrowed. "Then why would bounty hunters target you specifically? They knew exactly who you were." That was a good question, and I didn't have an answer. I reached into my jacket and pulled out my diplomatic medallion, a simple metal disc emblazoned with the Earth Alliance crest. It served as both identification and secure storage for diplomatic credentials. As I turned it over in my hand, something felt off. "This feels heavier than usual," I muttered, examining it more closely. Kira watched intently as I found the hidden release mechanism and triggered it. The medallion split open, revealing not just the expected credential chip, but another, smaller chip nestled beside it, one I had never seen before. "By the void," Kira breathed, her skin flashing a pale gray. Shock. If I remembered the Vexari emotional spectrum correctly. That's it. That's the Proxima code. I stared at the tiny chip in disbelief. "How the hell did this get in my medallion?" "You were set up," Draxus called back, banking the shuttle around a rocky outcropping. "Someone wanted you to transport that without knowing it." My mind raced, cycling through possibilities. Who had access to my diplomatic credentials? Who knew I'd be on Zathoria? The list wasn't long. My superiors at the diplomatic corps, my assistant, the mission briefing team. "We can't go back to the spaceport," I realized aloud. If those hunters knew who I was and what I was carrying, others might too. And I can't contact the embassy without knowing who set me up. Kira nodded grimly. "The abandoned mining facility will provide temporary shelter. From there, we can establish secure communications and determine our next move." The shuttle descended toward a cluster of dilapidated structures, nestled against the base of a jagged mountain range. The mining facility had clearly been abandoned for years, roof panels missing, equipment left to rust in the harsh Zathorian environment. Draxus set us down on a faded landing pad, powering down the engines but leaving auxiliary systems running. "Home sweet home," he announced. "At least for tonight. Facility still has emergency power and basic life support. Not comfortable, but survivable." I pocketed both chips, including the mysterious Proxima code, and followed Kira and Draxus into the main structure. The interior was dusty and cold, illuminated only by the faint emergency lighting that still functioned. Ancient mining equipment loomed like sleeping beasts in the shadows. "I'll secure the perimeter," Kira stated, already moving to check exits and vantage points. Draxus gestured to a small room off the main chamber. "Control center should be in there. Might be able to access communication systems, if they're still operational." Left momentarily alone, I took stock of our situation. I was stranded in an abandoned mining facility on a hostile planet, apparently carrying stolen military technology, with only a taciturn alien bodyguard and a suspicious draconian merchant for company. Not exactly how I'd planned to spend my diplomatic mission. The control room was in better shape than I'd expected. Dust covered everything, but the consoles appeared intact. I brushed off the main terminal and was surprised when it powered up at my touch. the screen flickering to life with a dim blue glow. "Old, but reliable," I murmured, quickly assessing the system. It was primitive by current standards, but had a functional communications array. Perfect. I hesitated before initiating contact with the Earth Embassy. If someone there had planted the Proxima code on me, reaching out could alert them to our location. Instead, I accessed one of the secure diplomatic backchannels, emergency communication protocols known only to field operatives. The connection took nearly a minute to establish, the ancient system struggling with modern encryption. Finally, a secure text channel opened. Secure channel established. Identity confirmed. Vance. Derek, Diplomatic Corps. Warning, location compromised. I frowned at the last line. That wasn't standard protocol. Explain location compromised. I typed. The response came almost immediately. All diplomatic personnel flagged. Accusation, military technology theft. Warrant issued for your detainment. Source, internal. My blood ran cold. Someone had not only planted the code on me, but had reported me as the thief. I was being framed, and convincingly so. I heard footsteps behind me and quickly blanked the screen. Kiera entered, her expression unreadable. "Perimeter is secure for now," she reported. "But we should not stay longer than necessary. This location will not remain safe indefinitely." I nodded, my mind still processing the implications of what I'd learned. "Kiera, I think there's an inside man. Someone in the Earth Diplomatic Corps set me up to take the fall for stealing this." I held up the tiny chip. "And they're good. They've already issued warrants for my arrest." She studied me for a long moment, her amber eyes searching my face. I had the uncomfortable feeling she was assessing whether to believe me or simply complete her mission by turning me in herself. "You should know," she finally said, "that I was not assigned to you merely as a bodyguard. The Vexari High Command received intelligence that the Proxima code had been stolen. I was tasked with identifying and recovering it, using the mining negotiations as cover." I felt a flash of anger. "So you've been spying on me this whole time? Waiting for me to lead you to this thing I didn't even know I had?" "I was fulfilling my duty," she replied evenly. "But I have observed you closely these past days. Derek Vance, you do not display the behaviors of a thief or a traitor. Your surprise at discovering the code was genuine. Coming from a Vexari, this was practically a declaration of trust. Their race was known for their perceptiveness. Some said they could literally smell deception, though I'd always assumed that was just a rumor to make them more intimidating." "So what now?" I asked. "I can't go back to the embassy. You can't report to your superiors without risking the real thief discovering we know. And we're stuck on a planet with bounty hunters searching for us." Kiera's expression hardened with determination. "We find the truth. We identify who planted the code on you and why, and then we clear both our names." Draxus appeared in the doorway, his scaled face impassive. "Hate to interrupt this touching moment of interspecies trust, but we've got company. Security drones. Alliance model. Someone tracked your communication." I cursed under my breath. The back channel wasn't as secure as I'd thought, or someone was monitoring it specifically for my signature. "How many?" Kiera demanded, already moving toward the exit. "3 that I can see. Probably more coming." Draxus pulled his dual pistols from their holsters. "We can fight or run. Your choice." I looked at Kiera, our temporary alliance still fragile but necessary. "We run. We need answers before confrontations." She nodded once. Decisive. "The shuttle is too obvious. There's a maintenance tunnel system beneath the facility. We can use it to reach the foothills, then proceed on foot." "On foot?" I echoed, thinking of the harsh Zathorian landscape. "Through the wastelands?" Kiera's mouth curved in what might have been a smile, the first I'd seen from her. "Afraid your diplomatic legs can't handle a little hike?" Despite everything, I found myself grinning back. "Lead the way, warrior." We gathered what supplies we could find: emergency rations, water purification tablets, a portable power cell, and headed for the maintenance tunnels. Draxus hesitated at the entrance. "This is where we part ways," he announced. "I've done my good deed for the decade. Besides, my shuttle needs protecting." "We appreciate your assistance," Kira said formally. Draxus shrugged. "Don't mention it. Literally. If anyone asks, I've never seen either of you." He turned to leave, then paused. "Word of advice, though. Earth Embassy isn't your only option. The old communication relay station in Sector 7 might be worth a visit. Less security, more access. Just saying." With that cryptic suggestion, he was gone, heading back toward his shuttle while we descended into the dimly lit maintenance tunnels. The passages were narrow and occasionally claustrophobic, designed for maintenance drones rather than humanoids. Kiera had to stoop significantly, her armored shoulders nearly scraping both walls. "What did he mean about a relay station?" I asked, as we navigated the labyrinthine system. "Sector 7 houses an old Earth Alliance communication hub," Kiera explained. "Established before the current embassy, now used mainly as backup, minimal staffing, outdated security, but direct access to Earth Alliance networks." "And how does a draconian merchant know about it?" "Draxus is no mere merchant. His kind rarely are." That was all she would say on the matter, focusing instead on navigating the tunnels. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 40 minutes, we emerged through a rusty access hatch onto the rocky foothills of the mountain range. The Zathorian night was in full swing, 3 moons casting conflicting shadows across the barren landscape. In the distance, I could see the lights of the main settlement, including the distinctive silhouette of the Earth Embassy Tower. "We head east," Kira decided, pointing toward a ridge of jagged rocks. "The terrain will provide cover, and we can circle back toward Sector 7 by morning." I was about to respond when a violent tremor shook the ground beneath us. Not an earthquake. I'd been briefed on Zathoria's geological stability, but something else. "Organic sandstorm," Kiera said grimly, looking toward the horizon where a massive cloud of swirling particles was visible, even in the dim light. "We need shelter. Now." "Organic sandstorm? What does that even mean?" "It means if we're caught in it, our flesh will be stripped from our bones," she replied, already scanning the surroundings for options. "There, that rock formation. It should provide adequate protection." We sprinted toward the indicated formation, a jutting outcrop that formed a shallow cave on one side. We reached it just as the wind began to pick up, carrying with it a fine dust that stung my exposed skin on contact. The cave was barely large enough for both of us. Kira removed her outer armor plates to make more room, revealing a form-fitting undersuit beneath. Without the bulky armor, she looked less intimidating but no less formidable, all lean muscle and graceful lines. "That's better," I said without thinking. "Now I can see the warrior beneath the armor. Vexari are quite beautiful, especially from behind." The words left my mouth before my diplomatic filter could engage. I'd meant it as a compliment. The Vexari physique was genuinely impressive, but I immediately realized my mistake. Kira's skin flushed a brilliant pink, the color spreading rapidly from her face down her neck and arms. For a moment, she seemed too shocked to respond. Then her hand moved in a blur, connecting with my cheek in a slap so powerful it knocked me against the cave wall. "You dare!" she hissed, her voice quivering with what I assumed was rage. "You dishonor a Vexari warrior with such... My cheek throbbed painfully, and I tasted blood where I'd bitten my tongue. "I'm sorry," I managed, raising my hands in surrender. "That was inappropriate. Cultural misunderstanding. Won't happen again." She turned away sharply. Her skin still flushed that remarkable pink color. The sandstorm howled outside, forcing us to remain in uncomfortable proximity despite the tension. After several minutes of strained silence, Kira spoke again, her voice carefully controlled. You should understand something. Human. Among my people, comments about physical appearance are reserved for intimate relations or formal courtship rituals. What you said would be considered a declaration of romantic intent. I blinked in surprise. So I basically just propositioned you. In the crudest possible manner, yes. And the slap was the traditional response to an unwelcome advance. Had it been welcome, I would have... She trailed off, her skin darkening again, this time to a deep violet. You would have what? I prompted, genuinely curious now. Kira fixed me with a stern look. That is not a discussion we need to have. Focus on our mission, diplomat. When the storm passes, we have a communication relay to infiltrate. I nodded, but couldn't help smiling slightly. The formidable Vexari warrior had been genuinely flustered by my accidental flirtation. It made her seem more relatable, somehow. Less the perfect alien warrior, and more a person with her own cultural norms and reactions. The storm raged for hours, trapping us in the small cave. Despite the initial awkwardness, we eventually fell into conversation about our respective worlds and experiences. I learned that Kira had trained as a warrior since childhood, following a family tradition spanning generations. She, in turn, seemed fascinated by my descriptions of Earth's diverse ecosystems and cultures. Your world sounds chaotic, she observed. So many different beliefs, systems, environments. How do you maintain order? I laughed. Who says we do? Earth is beautifully messy. That's its strength. On Vexar, such disorder would be unthinkable. Our society functions because each person knows their role and fulfills it without question. No rebellious teenagers? No one who wants something different from what they're assigned? Kira hesitated. There are exceptions. Those who question, they are given opportunities to prove their worth in new roles, if they can demonstrate aptitude. And if they can't? Then they accept their designated place. The needs of society outweigh individual desires. It was a fundamentally different worldview from the one I'd grown up with. Yet I could see its logic. Different evolutionary paths, different planetary challenges. They'd shaped our species in divergent ways. By the time the storm subsided, dawn was breaking over the Zathorian landscape. We emerged from our shelter, Kira donning her armor once more, transforming back into the imposing warrior I'd first met. Sector 7 is approximately 4 hours' journey on foot, she announced, orienting herself with practiced ease. We should arrive before midday. The trek was arduous, crossing rough terrain under the increasingly harsh Zathorian sun. Kira moved with tireless efficiency, occasionally doubling back to help me navigate particularly difficult sections. By the time the communication relay came into view, a modest complex of low buildings surrounded by transmission arrays, I was exhausted, my diplomatic attire ill-suited for wilderness hiking. We need a plan, Kira said as we surveyed the facility from a concealed position. Security is minimal, but present. 2 guards at the main entrance, likely automated systems covering the perimeter. I studied the layout, recalling standard Earth Alliance protocols. There should be a maintenance access point on the eastern side, used for emergency repairs to the array. Minimal security because it only leads to the exterior components. Kira nodded approvingly. Good. We enter there, then navigate to the central communication hub. What's our objective once inside? We need to access the secure diplomatic channel directly, bypass the embassy monitoring systems. If someone there is working for the hegemony, they're watching the normal channels. But the relay station has direct uplink capability to Earth Central. And you can operate these systems. I smiled grimly. Before I was a diplomat, I was an Alliance communications specialist. This is actually my territory. We approached the facility cautiously, using the uneven terrain for cover. As predicted, The maintenance access point was minimally guarded, a single electronic lock that I bypassed using my diplomatic override codes. They hadn't yet been flagged in the system, apparently. The interior of the relay station was utilitarian and largely automated. We encountered no personnel as we made our way through service corridors toward the central hub. Either the facility was running on a skeleton crew, or we'd gotten lucky with shift timing. The communication center was a circular room dominated by monitoring equipment and uplink terminals. A single technician sat at the main console, back to us, wearing sound-dampening headphones as he monitored transmission quality. Kiera moved with silent efficiency, approaching the technician from behind and applying a precise nerve hold that rendered him unconscious before he even knew we were there. "He'll wake in approximately 20 minutes with no lasting damage," she informed me, carefully arranging the man in a recovery position. "Make your communication quickly." I sat at the main terminal, fingers flying across the interface with remembered skill. The system was older than what I was used to, but the fundamentals hadn't changed. Within minutes, I'd established a secure, direct channel to Earth Central Command, bypassing the local embassy entirely. Secure direct channel established. Identity: Vance, Derek, Diplomatic Corps. Status: classified emergency. I hesitated only briefly before typing. Requesting immediate verification. Security breach, Proxima code. Suspected internal compromise at Zathoria Embassy. Deputy Ambassador Elliott authorization. Patterns required for analysis. Deputy Thomas Elliott was my immediate superior, the man who had briefed me on this mission and personally handed me my diplomatic credentials before departure. If someone had planted the Proxima code in my medallion, he would have had the opportunity. The response took longer this time. Kiera watched the door while I waited, tension building with each passing second. Finally. Analysis complete. Deputy Elliott authorization. Patterns show anomalous access to diplomatic credential system 3 days prior to your deployment. Unauthorized security override detected. My suspicions confirmed. I felt a cold anger building. Thomas Elliott had been my mentor, someone I'd trusted implicitly, and he'd set me up to take the fall for a security breach that could lead to war. Additional information: Deputy Elliott communications with unregistered frequencies. Detected. Pattern matches. Known hegemony, transmission, protocols. So there it was. Elliott wasn't just a thief. He was a traitor, working with the hegemony. But why? What could they offer that would make him betray everything he'd sworn to protect? I looked up at Kiera, who had been reading over my shoulder. "Elliott is our mole, and he's working with the hegemony." Her expression darkened. "This is worse than I feared. If the hegemony has infiltrated Earth's diplomatic corps at such a high level, we need proof," I said, turning back to the terminal. "Something concrete we can take to both our governments, and we need to know what they're planning with the Proxima code." I requested all available intelligence on hegemony activities near Zathorian space, using my emergency clearance to override the usual restrictions. What came back chilled me to the bone. Project designation: H-Targeter. Classification: Ultra-Restricted. Summary: Biological weapon designed for species-specific targeting. Current configuration: human and Vexari DNA sequences. "By the void," Kiera breathed, her skin paling to an ashen gray. "A genocide weapon, targeting both our species." The implications were staggering. The hegemony wasn't just looking to breach our security systems. They were planning to eliminate humans and Vexari entirely, presumably to take our territories without resistance. The Proxima code must be the final component they need, I reasoned. Access to our defense networks would allow them to deploy the weapon directly into our core systems before we could respond. Kiera's hand moved to her plasma blade. "We must take this information to the Vexari High Command and your Earth Central immediately." "Not so fast," I cautioned. If Elliot has compromised the embassy, he might have contingencies in place. And your superiors. Can you be certain none of them are compromised? She hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the suggestion. The Vexari do not betray their own. Everyone has a price, Kiera, or a pressure point. We can't risk this information falling into the wrong hands before we have a plan. What do you suggest, then? I thought for a moment, considering our limited options. We need to confront Elliot directly, get him to incriminate himself with witnesses present, unimpeachable witnesses from both our governments. That is incredibly dangerous. So is doing nothing while the hegemony prepares to wipe out our species. Kiera studied me with newfound respect. You are more warrior than diplomat, Derek Vance. I grinned despite the gravity of our situation. Maybe I'm just a really effective diplomat. We downloaded the critical intelligence to a secure portable drive and erased our access from the system logs. The technician was still unconscious as we slipped out the way we had come, but we didn't have much time before our presence would be discovered. The Earth Embassy hosts a Security Council meeting today, I recalled, consulting my diplomatic schedule. Representatives from multiple species, including Vexari War Commander Tyvek. If we can get inside during the meeting, we can expose Elliot before representatives of both our governments. Kiera finished. But the embassy will be heavily guarded, especially with the security alert about you. Then we'll need a really good infiltration plan, I said, already formulating ideas. And possibly a disguise. Kiera's expression suggested she wasn't thrilled with where this was heading, but she nodded grimly. I know someone who might help us. A Vexari trader in the central market, one who deals in items not strictly approved by either of our governments. A smuggler, you mean? I prefer resource acquisition specialist. She owes me a favor from a past incident. I raised an eyebrow. Sounds like there's a story there. One you will not hear, Kiera replied firmly, but with a hint of something almost like humor in her eyes. Come. We have preparations to make if we're going to infiltrate the most secure Earth facility on Zathoria. The central market of Zathoria's main settlement was a riot of colors, sounds, and smells, most of them unpleasant to human senses. Kiera led me through winding alleys between stalls, selling everything from exotic foodstuffs to questionable mechanical parts. We'd taken a circuitous route to avoid main thoroughfares where we might be recognized, and I discarded my distinctive diplomatic jacket in favor of a nondescript cloak purchased from a street vendor. Kiera, meanwhile, had removed her more distinctive armor pieces, keeping only the essential protective components. Without the full battle regalia, she attracted less attention, though her height and purple skin still made her stand out in a crowd. We eventually reached a small shop tucked between a food stall and a parts dealer. The sign, written in multiple languages, advertised unique solutions for unique problems. Wait here, Kiera instructed, positioning me in a shadowed alcove across from the shop. Mesari is particular about who she deals with. I watched as Kiera entered the shop, disappearing behind a beaded curtain. Minutes passed, stretching into nearly half an hour before she emerged again, accompanied by another Vexari, shorter, with skin a deeper shade of purple and intricate markings along her neck and hands that I recognized as the distinctive patterns of the merchant caste. Kiera beckoned me over, and I approached cautiously, aware of the assessing look Mesari gave me as I neared. So this is your human problem, she said in accented common, circling me like a predator evaluating prey. Scrawny for a diplomat. But the eyes, yes. I see why you'd risk your standing for this one. I wasn't sure what that meant, but Kira's skin darkened in what I was beginning to recognize as embarrassment. We require infiltration equipment, she said stiffly. As discussed. Mesari chuckled, a melodic sound, unlike anything I'd heard from Kiera. Yes, come inside, both of you, quickly, before someone notices the Vexari warrior consorting with a fugitive human. The interior of the shop was cluttered, but organized in a system that probably made sense to its owner. Shelves lined the walls, filled with containers, devices, and items I couldn't begin to identify. Mazzari locked the door behind us and activated a device that emitted a low hum. "Privacy field," she explained, catching my curious look. "Disrupts surveillance. Now, Kiera tells me you need to infiltrate the Earth Embassy during a high-security meeting. Normally, I'd say that's suicide, but..." She produced a small case from beneath the counter. "I have something that might help." Inside the case were two devices that resembled slim, metallic bands. "Stealth tech," Mazzari announced proudly. "Not full invisibility. The power requirements would be impossible in something this small, but visual distortion and biosign suppression. Enough to fool most security systems and casual observers. If you're careful." I picked up one of the bands, examining it with fascination. Vexari technology. Originally, with some draconian modifications I've made, the Vexari High Command would execute me for possessing these, let alone selling them. She gave Kiera a pointed look. "Which is why this clears all debts between us, warrior." Kiera nodded solemnly. "Agreed." "There's more," Mazzari continued, producing another, smaller case. "Security bypass modules. One-time use. But they'll get you through most standard Earth Alliance security doors. After that, you're on your own." I took the second case, tucking it securely into an inner pocket. "Thank you for the risk you're taking." Mazzari's expression turned serious. "It's not for you, human. Kiera told me what's at stake. I have family on Vexar Prime." She turned to Kiera. "Be careful, warrior. What you're attempting. The consequences of failure would be severe." "The consequences of inaction would be extinction," Kiera replied grimly. We left the shop through a rear exit that connected to another series of alleyways, eventually emerging near the edge of the diplomatic quarter. The Earth Embassy dominated the skyline, a sleek, modern tower of glass and steel that reflected the Zathorian sun like a beacon. "The Security Council meeting begins in 3 hours, I said, checking the time. "We need to get into position before the delegates arrive." Kiera nodded, her expression resolute. "The service entrance on the western side will have the least security. Maintenance staff use it throughout the day." "Perfect. The stealth bands should get us past the initial checkpoints. After that, we'll need to reach the ambassador's private office. If my suspicions are correct, Elliot will use it to prep before the meeting. And if he's not alone." I grimaced. "Then we improvise." We spent the next hour observing the embassy from a safe distance, noting security patterns and staff movements. As diplomatic buildings went, it was relatively fortress-like, a reflection of Zathoria's somewhat unstable political environment. But like any fortress, it had its vulnerabilities. When the time came, we activated the stealth bands. The sensation was bizarre, like being wrapped in a thin layer of static electricity. My vision blurred slightly at the edges, and looking down at my body revealed a strange, shifting quality to my appearance, as if I wasn't quite solid. "Stay close," Kiera murmured, her voice sounding oddly distant through the field effect. "Move naturally but purposefully. The technology masks us from direct observation, but unusual movement will draw attention." We approached the service entrance during a shift change, when the coming and going of maintenance staff provided cover for our entry. The stealth technology worked as promised. The security guard's eyes slid past us without recognition, and the automated scanners remained silent as we passed. Inside, we navigated service corridors and utility shafts, avoiding the main throughways where embassy staff might question our presence despite the stealth tech. It was slow going, requiring patience and precision. But eventually, we reached the executive level where Ambassador Harrington's office was located. "Security is heavier here," I whispered, noting the additional guards and scanning equipment. "The bypass modules should work on the door locks, but we'll need to time it perfectly with the guard rotation." Kira pointed silently to a security monitor mounted on the wall nearby. It displayed the guard schedule, a 3-minute window between patrols that would be our only opportunity. We waited, tense and silent, until the current patrol passed. Then, moving with coordinated precision, we approached the ambassador's office door. I attached the bypass module to the security panel, and it immediately began cycling through access codes. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only seconds, the panel flashed green, and the door slid open silently. We slipped inside, and the door closed behind us. The ambassador's office was opulent by diplomatic standards: plush carpeting, real wood furniture, and a spectacular view of the Zathorian capital through floor-to-ceiling windows. A large desk dominated one end of the room, with a private terminal that I immediately recognized as our target. "Keep watch," I instructed Kira, moving to the terminal. "This won't take long." The terminal was secured, but my diplomatic credentials, still active despite the alert, provided enough access to begin searching. I needed concrete evidence of Elliot's betrayal, communications, transfer records, anything that would convince both governments of the threat. What I found exceeded my expectations. Hidden beneath layers of encryption was a file simply labeled Hegemony. Inside were detailed communications between Elliot and his Hegemony contacts, plans for the deployment of the H-targeter biological weapon, and, most damning of all, a complete roster of Hegemony agents embedded in both Earth and Vexari governments. "Kira," I called softly, "you need to see this." She joined me at the terminal, her expression growing increasingly grim as she scanned the information. "This is comprehensive," she said finally. "Elliot has been working with the Hegemony for years, and he's not alone." I nodded, downloading the files to a secure data stick. "With this evidence, both our governments will have to—" The office door slid open. We both turned, the stealth bands, still active but useless, against someone who knew exactly where to look. Deputy Ambassador Thomas Elliot stood in the doorway, his distinguished features arranged in an expression of cold amusement. Behind him stood War Commander Tyvek of the Vexari, along with 2 armed guards from each species. "Derek," Elliot said pleasantly, as if greeting me at a diplomatic function, "I had a feeling you might find your way here. And Kaira Valshan, I'm disappointed. The Vexari were supposed to be incorruptible." "The only corruption here is yours, Elliot," I replied, deactivating my stealth band. There was no point maintaining the pretense now. "We know about the Proxima Code, the H-targeter weapon, everything." "You know nothing," Elliot scoffed. "You're a pawn who's outlived his usefulness. Derek, and you," he turned to Kira, "are a disgrace to your species, protecting a human thief." War Commander Tyvek stepped forward, his imposing frame even larger than Kira's. His skin was a deep, royal purple, marked with the elaborate scarification that denoted his high military rank. "Warrior Valshan," he rumbled in the formal Vexari tongue, which my diplomatic translator rendered into English. "You have betrayed your oath and your people by aligning with this human criminal. The punishment for such treachery is death." Kira deactivated her own stealth band and stood tall, meeting the War Commander's gaze without flinching. "With respect, Commander, it is you who has been deceived. The human is innocent. We have discovered evidence of a Hegemony plot to destroy both our species using a biological weapon. Deputy Elliot is their agent." Tyvek's expression remained impassive, but I noticed his eyes flick briefly to Elliot, then back to Kira. "Serious accusations require serious evidence. Warrior Valshan." "We have it," I interjected, holding up the data stick. "Complete communications between Elliot and the Hegemony. Details of the H-targeter weapon designed to target human and Vexari DNA specifically, and a list of Hegemony agents in both our governments. Elliot's pleasant demeanor slipped, revealing a flash of something cold and calculating beneath. Fabrications and desperate attempts by a thief to evade justice. Commander Tyvek, I suggest we secure both the fugitives and whatever false evidence they claim to have. The Security Council is waiting. I could see the war commander weighing his options, caught between his duty to uphold Vexari law and the disturbing possibility that a greater threat existed. In that moment of hesitation, I made a decision. Commander Tyvek, I said formally, switching to the Vexari diplomatic dialect I'd studied but rarely had occasion to use. I invoke the right of truth hearing, as established in the Earth-Vexari Cooperative Treaty, Section 17, Paragraph 4. Elliot's eyes widened in genuine surprise. Few humans bothered to learn the intricacies of Vexari diplomatic protocol, let alone how to invoke their ancient customs within modern treaty frameworks. Tyvek's expression shifted subtly. Something like respect, perhaps. The right of truth hearing is granted, human diplomat. Speak your truth, and be judged. I took a deep breath, aware that what I said next would determine not just my fate and Kiera's, but potentially the survival of both our species. War Commander, 3 days ago, I was dispatched to Zathoria on what I believed was a routine diplomatic mission to negotiate mining rights. Deputy Elliot personally provided my credentials and briefed me on the mission parameters. I held up my diplomatic medallion. Unknown to me, the Proxima Code, a decryption key capable of breaching both Earth and Vexari security systems, was hidden within this medallion. I discovered its presence only after being attacked by bounty hunters working for the hegemony. Tyvek's eyes narrowed at the mention of the hegemony, but he remained silent, listening. With Warrior Valshan's help, I investigated and discovered that Deputy Elliot placed the code in my medallion, then reported it stolen, by me, to create a diversion while the real plan proceeded. That plan, Commander, is genocide. I gestured to the terminal, where the evidence was still displayed. The hegemony has developed a biological weapon called H-Targeter, designed specifically to target human and Vexari DNA, while leaving other species unaffected. With both our populations eliminated, they would be free to claim our territories without resistance. Elliot laughed, the sound sharp and dismissive. Absurd conspiracy theories. Commander, surely you don't believe? The evidence speaks for itself, I interrupted, transferring the files to the main display where everyone could see them. Communications, weapons specifications, deployment plans, all tied directly to Deputy Elliot's personal authorization codes. The room fell silent as damning document after document appeared on screen. Elliot's face hardened, his diplomatic mask finally slipping completely. You understand nothing, he hissed. The hegemony is inevitable. They've been infiltrating both our governments for decades. This isn't betrayal, it's survival. Those who align with them early will be spared. It was the confession we needed, spoken before witnesses from both governments. Commander Tyvek's posture shifted subtly into a combat stance, his hand moving to the ceremonial blade at his hip. Thomas Elliot, he said, his voice like distant thunder. You stand accused of conspiracy to commit genocide against two sovereign species. By your own words, you are guilty. Elliot's eyes darted between us, calculating. For a moment, I thought he might attempt to flee, but instead, he straightened his shoulders and smiled, a cold, confident expression that sent a chill down my spine. It doesn't matter, he said quietly. You're too late. The hegemony fleet has already activated the Cygnus Gateway. Within hours, their ships will arrive carrying the H-Targeter. Neither of your governments can mobilize a response in time. A communications panel on the wall suddenly flashed red, emitting an urgent alert tone. One of the Earth Guards moved to check it, his expression grim as he read the display. Sir, he reported to no one in particular. Long-range sensors have detected multiple ships emerging from the Cygnus Gateway, Configuration matches known hegemony vessels. So Elliot was right. The attack had already begun. But instead of despair, I felt a strange clarity, a certainty about what needed to happen next. "Commander Tyvek," I said, meeting the imposing Vexari's gaze directly. "I believe we have a common enemy. Whatever historical tensions exist between our species, they pale in comparison to the threat we now face." Tyvek was silent for a long moment, his alien features unreadable to my human perceptions. Then, to everyone's surprise, he laughed, a deep, resonant sound that filled the room. "Derek Vance," he said finally, "you speak with the heart of a warrior and the mind of a diplomat. A rare combination." He turned to Kira. "Warrior Valshan, your judgment was correct. This human is not our enemy." Relief flooded through me, but it was short-lived. The immediate threat of the hegemony fleet still loomed. "We need to alert both our governments," I urged. "Coordinate a defense." Tyvek nodded grimly. "The Security Council meeting provides an opportunity. Representatives from both Earth and Vexar are already gathered, along with allies from other systems." "And the Proxima Code?" Kira asked, gesturing to the chip I still carried. "A powerful bargaining chip," I realized. "The hegemony wants it desperately, which means we can use it against them." Elliot, now under guard but still defiant, sneered. "You think you can stop an entire hegemony fleet with diplomatic talks and a security key? You're more naive than I thought. Derek." I ignored him, my mind racing through possibilities. "Commander, if we can get a message to the fleet commanders of both our species, we might be able to mount a defense at the Cygnus Gateway itself, contain the hegemony forces before they can deploy the weapon." "An ambitious plan," Tyvek acknowledged. "But perhaps our only option." He turned to his guards. "Secure the traitor, then summon the Vexari delegation to emergency session." As Elliot was led away, I turned to Kira, who had remained stoically silent through most of the exchange. "Ready for one more impossible mission?" Her lips curved in what I now recognized as a Vexari smile. "With you, diplomat, always." The news of the hegemony's imminent attack spread rapidly through the diplomatic community. The Security Council meeting transformed into an emergency war council, with representatives from Earth and Vexar taking center stage. Ambassador Harrington, initially skeptical of my story, became a staunch ally once presented with the evidence against Elliot. Word spread beyond the diplomatic quarter to the general population. The response was mixed. Many Vexari warriors viewed Kira with suspicion for her alliance with a human, while others, particularly younger Vexari, began quoting an ancient proverb: "When the star changes course, the river must turn." Meanwhile, Earth citizens on Zathoria seemed divided between fear of the coming hegemony fleet and newfound appreciation for the Vexari, whose military might represented their best hope for survival. Amidst this chaos, a formal ceremony was hastily arranged in the embassy's Grand Hall. Representatives from both governments stood witness as Commander Tyvek and Ambassador Harrington signed an emergency alliance pact. Kyera and I were called forward as symbols of this new cooperation, exchanging traditional tokens, an Earth Alliance medallion and a Vexari honor band, to symbolize our shared commitment. As I tied the Vexari band around my wrist, its intricate patterns seeming to shift in the light, I caught Kira's eye. Her skin flushed a deep violet, a color I now knew indicated deep emotion among her people, whether pride, affection, or something else entirely. I couldn't be sure, but it felt significant. The formalities complete, we moved to the real work of preparing a defense. I was assigned to intelligence coordination, while Kyera was given command of a strike force comprising both human and Vexari operatives. Our mission: infiltrate the hegemony fleet as it emerged from the Cygnus Gateway, and disable the H-Targeter weapon before it could be deployed. Draxus, surprisingly, reappeared during these preparations, offering his shuttle and his services. "Can't let two civilizations fall to the hegemony," he explained with characteristic nonchalance. "Bad for business." His stealth-modified shuttle would be our means of approaching the hegemony fleet undetected, a critical advantage given the overwhelming forces we faced. The night before our mission, as final preparations were being made, Kiera found me on an observation deck overlooking the Zathorian capital. The three moons cast overlapping shadows across the landscape, creating an otherworldly pattern of light and dark. "You should be resting," she said, coming to stand beside me at the railing. "Tomorrow will require all our strength." "Probably," I agreed. "But my mind won't quiet. Too many possibilities. Too many ways this could go wrong." Kiera nodded, understanding. Before battle, a Vexari warrior meditates on inevitability. We acknowledge that death may come, but focus on the purpose that drives us forward regardless. "And what's your purpose, Kiera?" She was silent for a moment, her gaze fixed on the distant horizon. Once, it was simply duty to my people and our ways. Now, it has grown more complex. I smiled slightly. "Funny how that happens when worlds collide." "Indeed." She turned to face me directly. "Derek Vance, if we do not survive tomorrow's mission, I would have you know that your comment in the cave, while inappropriate by Vexari standards, was not entirely unwelcome." My eyebrows rose in surprise. "Are you saying you forgive me for admiring your, warrior physique?" Her skin flushed that remarkable violet again, but she held my gaze steadily. "I am saying that cultural differences need not be barriers. They can be bridges, if approached with respect and understanding." I reached out hesitantly, taking her hand in mine, a gesture that crossed species boundaries. Her skin was warmer than human temperature, smooth despite the warrior's calluses. "Then let's build a bridge, Warrior Valshan, starting with surviving tomorrow." She squeezed my hand gently, mindful of her superior strength. "A worthy mission, Diplomat Vance." Dawn broke over Zathoria as we boarded Draxus's modified shuttle. The Draconian had outdone himself, adding additional stealth features and weapon systems procured through channels I decided not to inquire about. "She's not pretty," he announced as we settled into the cramped cockpit. "But she'll get us inside the hegemony perimeter, without triggering their sensors." Kiera, now dressed in a lightweight stealth variant of her armor, nodded approvingly. "Your modifications are impressive, Draconian. Just don't scratch the paint," he replied with a toothy grin. "Or do. Might look more authentic that way." I had exchanged my tattered diplomatic attire for a combat suit, a strange feeling after years of negotiation rather than confrontation. The weight of the plasma pistol at my hip was unfamiliar, but necessary. Today, words alone wouldn't save us. The journey to the Cygnus Gateway took 3 hours, during which we received regular updates from the joint Earth-Vexari fleet, assembling to confront the hegemony forces. The news wasn't encouraging. Our hastily assembled defense was outnumbered at least 2-1. "We're approaching the gateway perimeter," Draxus announced, as the massive structure came into view on our sensors. The ancient Cygnus Gateway was a technological marvel, a ring of energy nearly a kilometer in diameter, capable of creating stable wormholes to distant parts of the galaxy. It had been built by a long-vanished civilization and repurposed by modern species for faster-than-light travel. Currently, it pulsed with ominous energy as hegemony vessels continued to emerge from its center, warships bristling with weapons, troop carriers, and at the heart of the formation, a vessel unlike the others, sleeker, more streamlined, with distinctive containment fields visible even at this distance. "The weapons platform," Kiera identified it immediately. "That ship carries the H-Targeter." "Then that's our target," I confirmed, studying the tactical display. "Draxus, can you get us close enough to board?" The Draconian bared his teeth in what might have been a grin or a grimace. I can get you close enough to count the rivets on their hull. But boarding? That's your problem to solve. As we approached, using the confusion of the emerging fleet as cover, I noticed something unexpected. The hegemony ships weren't moving into attack formation. Instead, they were holding position near the gateway, as if waiting for something. They're stalling, I realized. They know our defense fleet is coming, but they're not advancing to meet it. Why? Kiera studied the pattern of ships with a tactician's eye. They're protecting the weapons platform. Perhaps the H-Targeter isn't ready for deployment yet. Or they're waiting for the rest of their fleet to arrive, Draxus suggested grimly. Those might just be the advance forces. Either possibility gave us a narrow window of opportunity. If we could board the weapons platform before the main confrontation began, we might be able to sabotage the H-Targeter before it could be deployed. Draxus guided our shuttle through the edge of the hegemony formation, his piloting skills proving as impressive as his modifications. The stealth systems worked perfectly. None of the hegemony vessels showed any sign of detecting our presence as we slipped between them, approaching the weapons platform from its ventral side. There! Kiera pointed to a maintenance airlock visible on our scanners. Standard configuration. I can override the security if you can get us close enough. Draxus nodded, adjusting our course. Brace yourselves. This will require some creative flying. What followed was the most harrowing navigation I'd ever experienced. Draxus threaded our shuttle through impossibly narrow gaps between hegemony vessels. At one point, skimming so close to a cruiser's hull that I could see individual weapon emplacements through the viewport. Throughout it all, he maintained a running commentary of colorful draconian expletives that my translator wisely left untranslated. Finally, we reached the weapons platform, positioning ourselves beneath the maintenance airlock. Kiera immediately set to work on the security override, her fingers dancing across the portable terminal with practiced efficiency. I have access, she announced after tense minutes. But we have another problem. The atmospheric systems in this section are offline. We'll need to use our emergency oxygen supplies until we can reach a pressurized area. We donned the compact breathing apparatus from our equipment packs, sufficient for about 30 minutes of activity. Not nearly enough time to complete our mission and return. We'd need to find internal oxygen supplies or an alternate escape route. I'll wait here, Draxus said, patting the shuttle's controls. Keep the engine running, as you humans say. When you're ready to leave, if you're ready to leave, signal on this frequency. He handed me a small communicator. Good luck. Try not to die horribly. Your concern is touching, I replied dryly. It's practical, he corrected. If you die, I don't get paid. With that encouraging send-off, Kiera and I entered the airlock. Once the outer door sealed behind us, we were committed. No turning back. No reinforcements. Just the two of us against whatever awaited inside the hegemony weapons platform. The interior was dimly lit by emergency lighting. The corridors narrow and utilitarian. Unlike Earth or Vexari vessels, which typically balanced function with at least minimal comfort. Hegemony ships were designed solely for efficiency. Every surface was hard angles and exposed conduits. The air, once we reached pressurized sections and could remove our breathing apparatus, tinged with the metallic scent of recycled atmosphere. We need to locate the weapon control center, I whispered, consulting the small holographic map we'd compiled from intelligence reports. Should be toward the center of the vessel. Kiera nodded, her plasma blade ready but inactive. Stay behind me. If we encounter resistance. I know, I interrupted. Let you handle it. We moved through the ship like ghosts, avoiding the few crew members we encountered by ducking into side passages or maintenance shafts. The hegemony, confident in their superior numbers and the element of surprise, hadn't anticipated infiltrators. Their internal security was minimal, another advantage for us. As we neared the central sections of the ship, however, security increased noticeably. Guard patrols became more frequent, and surveillance devices monitored key junctions. "We need a diversion," Kiera murmured as we observed a particularly well-guarded corridor that, according to our intelligence, led directly to the weapon control center. I examined our surroundings, noting a nearby environmental control panel. "I have an idea. Cover me." While Kiera kept watch, I accessed the panel, using techniques I'd learned during my earlier communications work to bypass its security. Within minutes, I had control of the atmospheric systems for this section of the ship. "Ready?" I asked, finger poised over the command sequence. Kiera nodded, tensing for action. I executed the command, and immediately, alarms began blaring throughout the section. The environmental system reported a catastrophic failure, a false reading I'd programmed, and emergency protocols kicked in. The guards at the corridor entrance hesitated, then abandoned their posts to follow evacuation procedures. "Now," I urged, and we sprinted down the corridor, taking advantage of the confusion. We reached the weapon control center entrance just as the last technician was evacuating, slipping inside before the automatic lockdown could engage. The control center was a circular chamber dominated by a massive containment unit in its center, a transparent cylinder filled with swirling, iridescent gas. Around it, workstations displayed incomprehensible data streams and monitoring systems. The H-targeter, Kiera identified, approaching the containment unit cautiously. A gaseous delivery system. Once released into a planet's atmosphere, it would spread rapidly, targeting specific DNA sequences. I moved to the main control console, analyzing the interfaces. They're preparing for deployment. Targeting vectors are already programmed for Earth and Vexar Prime. "Can you disable it?" I studied the system, recognizing elements similar to Earth Alliance bioweapon countermeasures I'd been briefed on during my diplomatic security training. Not disable, but maybe repurpose. Working quickly, I accessed the weapon's core programming, using the Proxima code to bypass security protocols that would have otherwise taken hours to crack. The hegemony had created the ultimate biological weapon, designed to target human and Vexari DNA with deadly precision. But what they hadn't anticipated was that this same precision could be turned against them. "I'm rewriting the targeting parameters," I explained, as my fingers flew across the interface. "Instead of attacking our DNA, it will neutralize itself upon contact with our biological markers. Essentially, it becomes a vaccine, harmless to us, but still active against other species." Kiera watched in amazement. "You're turning their weapon against them." "Poetic justice," I agreed grimly. "Once deployed, any hegemony forces exposed to it will be neutralized, while our people remain unaffected." As I worked, the ship's alarms suddenly shifted tone. No longer the environmental alert I'd triggered, but something more urgent. "Combat alert," Kiera translated, checking a nearby status display. "The Joint Fleet has arrived. The battle has begun." We needed to hurry. If the hegemony commanders realized their weapon had been compromised, they might abort the deployment entirely. Our plan depended on them proceeding as intended. "Done," I announced finally, stepping back from the console. "The targeting parameters are rewritten and locked. Even if they check the system before deployment, they won't be able to detect the changes without completely dismantling the weapon, which they don't have time for now." "Then our mission is complete," Kiera said, relief evident in her voice. "We should—" The control center door slid open unexpectedly, revealing a hegemony commander, flanked by armed guards. His species was unfamiliar to me, humanoid, but with distinctive ridge-like growths along his skull and jaw. "Intruders," he stated flatly, his voice modulated through a translation device. "How disappointing. Our intelligence suggested the Alliance wouldn't discover our plans until it was too late." I stepped forward, placing myself between the newcomers and the control console. "Your intelligence was wrong, just like your assumption that our species would fall easily to your schemes." The commander's expression shifted to something like amusement. Bold words from a pair of infiltrators surrounded by an entire hegemony fleet. Whatever you hope to accomplish here, you've failed. The H-Targeter will deploy as planned, and your civilizations will be reduced to historical footnotes. Perhaps, I replied, fighting to keep my expression neutral. But history is written by the survivors. The commander signaled his guards, who raised their weapons. You won't be among them. Kill them both. Then check the weapon systems for tampering. What happened next occurred with such speed that even I, watching it unfold, could barely follow. Kira moved like liquid lightning, her plasma blade igniting as she launched herself at the guards. The first fell before he could even fire, her blade severing his weapon arm at the elbow. The second managed to get off a wild shot that scorched the ceiling before Kira's blade found his chest. The commander backed away, drawing his own sidearm, but I was already moving. Years of diplomatic corps combat training, skills I rarely used but maintained nonetheless, took over. I ducked his first shot, closed the distance between us, and disarmed him with a precision strike to his wrist. His weapon clattered to the floor as I followed with a combination of blows that left him staggering. The weapon is already compromised, I told him, as he struggled to remain standing. Your grand plan for genocide will fail. The only question is how many of your own people you'll take down with you. Rage contorted his alien features. You lie! Our scientists have worked for years perfecting the H-Targeter. It cannot be... An explosion rocked the ship, cutting off his words. The battle outside was intensifying. The joint Earth-Vexari fleet engaging the hegemony forces with unexpected coordination and effectiveness. We need to go, Kira urged, having dispatched the remaining guards. The deployment sequence is automatic now. We've done what we came to do. I nodded, delivering one final strike that rendered the commander unconscious. Let's get back to Draxus before this whole ship comes apart around us. We raced through the corridors, no longer bothering with stealth. The ship's crew was fully occupied with the battle, emergency systems blaring as impacts from Alliance weapons rocked the structure. Twice, we encountered hegemony soldiers, but Kira's combat skills and my unexpected proficiency left them incapacitated in our wake. When we finally reached the maintenance airlock where we'd entered, I activated the communicator Draxus had given us. We're ready for extraction. Mission accomplished. His response was immediate and typically irreverent. About time. I was starting to think you'd gotten yourselves killed after all. Stand by for docking. Minutes later, we were aboard his shuttle, accelerating away from the weapons platform as chaos unfolded around us. The hegemony fleet was in disarray, caught between the advancing Alliance forces and the sudden realization that their secret weapon was no longer under their control. Through the viewport, we watched as the weapons platform's deployment bay opened, releasing the H-Targeter into space, exactly as planned. The iridescent gas expanded rapidly, engulfing nearby hegemony vessels before they could evade. It's working, I said with grim satisfaction, as the affected ships began powering down, their crews neutralized by the reprogrammed weapon. The modified H-Targeter is disabling their forces without harming our people. Kira placed a hand on my shoulder, her touch a gentle acknowledgement of what we'd accomplished together. You fought well today, Diplomat Vance, like a true warrior. I smiled, turning to meet her gaze. And you negotiated a peace between our species with your actions, Warrior Valshan, like a true diplomat. As Draxus navigated us through the battle toward the waiting Alliance flagship, I realized something profound had changed, not just between Kira and me, but between our peoples. The joint fleet moved with coordinated precision, human and Vexari vessels protecting each other, fighting as one against a common enemy. A partnership born of necessity, perhaps, but with the potential to become something more lasting. Hours later, aboard the Alliance flagship, We stood on the observation deck watching the final hegemony vessels retreat through the Cygnus Gateway. The modified H-Targeter had neutralized nearly half their fleet before they realized what was happening and ordered a withdrawal. The victory wasn't complete. The hegemony would regroup, adapt, return with new strategies. But we had won this battle decisively. The High Command is already discussing a permanent joint defense initiative, Kiera informed me, now dressed in a formal Vexari uniform rather than combat armor. The heart-shaped ventilation port was still visible, though more ornamental in this ceremonial attire. Your reprogramming of the H-Targeter impressed even our most skeptical military leaders. And the Earth Alliance Council is proposing expanded diplomatic relations, I replied, including cultural exchange programs and joint research initiatives. The hegemony will return, Kiera noted, her voice solemn as she gazed at the distant stars through the viewport. This was just the first engagement in what will likely be a prolonged conflict. Then we'll be ready, I said with more confidence than I truly felt. Together. We stood in comfortable silence for a moment. The enormity of what we'd accomplished, and what still lay ahead, settling around us like a cloak. The battle had been won, but the war was just beginning. The hegemony would regroup, analyze their failure, develop countermeasures against our improvised defense. Yet for the first time in galactic history, humans and Vexari stood united against a common threat. I've been assigned as permanent liaison to the Vexari High Command, I said finally, breaking the silence. Ambassador Harrington thinks my unique perspective will be valuable in strengthening our alliance. Kiera's skin flushed that now familiar deep violet, though she maintained her warrior's composure. The War Council has requested I continue as your security detail, given our effective partnership. I couldn't help but smile. Is that the only reason? It would be inappropriate to suggest otherwise, she replied formally. But the intensifying color of her skin told a different story. Among Vexari, such a visible display of emotion would be considered almost scandalously expressive. Well, I'm glad, I said simply. I can't think of anyone I'd rather have watching my back, or any other part of my anatomy. Her hand moved with warrior swiftness, but this time instead of a slap, her fingers intertwined with mine. By Vexari standards, such public contact was extraordinarily intimate. By human standards, it was just the beginning. You are still inappropriate. Derek Vance, she said, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it. And you're still the most formidable warrior I've ever met, Kiera Valshan, I replied. Even if you do blush when I compliment your posterior. Her free hand did deliver a light punch to my shoulder then, but there was unmistakable affection in the gesture. We should prepare for the diplomatic reception. Both our governments wish to formally recognize our actions. The reception was held in the flagship's Grand Hall, transformed from a utilitarian military space into something approaching elegance through the addition of Earth and Vexari decorative elements. Representatives from both governments mingled with military personnel, the atmosphere charged with the unusual energy of former rivals finding common ground. Draxus had been invited as well, though he looked distinctly uncomfortable in formal attire, his scaled skin seeming to bristle against the confines of a tailored jacket. He brightened considerably when informed that his assistants would be rewarded with both financial compensation and exclusive trading rights in certain contested systems. Not a bad outcome, he admitted, raising a glass of something that smoked faintly. Though I'm still not convinced you two aren't going to get yourselves killed on your next adventure. There won't be a next adventure, I assured him. Just routine diplomatic work from now on. Draxus made a sound that might have been a laugh. Right, and I'm just a simple merchant with no interesting past. Keep telling yourself that, diplomat. Before I could respond, the room's lighting dimmed slightly, and Ambassador Harrington stepped onto a small platform at the center of the hall. Beside her stood War Commander Tyvek, their contrasting figures, her small, elegant human form beside his towering Vexari presence, a visual representation of our unlikely alliance. Distinguished representatives, honored warriors, esteemed guests, Harrington began, her voice carrying clearly through the hall. Today, we celebrate not just a victory, but a beginning. For too long, our peoples have viewed each other with suspicion and distance. It took a common enemy to show us the truth, that together, we are stronger than we could ever be apart. Tyvek stepped forward, his deep voice resonating with formal gravity. The Vexari do not easily trust outsiders. It is our way, born of centuries of conflict and survival. Yet today, we acknowledge that wisdom sometimes requires us to forge new paths when the stars change course. A murmur ran through the gathered Vexari at this reference to their ancient proverb. Kiera, standing beside me, straightened almost imperceptibly, pride evident in her posture. To honor the architects of our new alliance, Harrington continued, we call forward diplomat Derek Vance and warrior Kiera Valshan. All eyes turned to us as we approached the platform. I was acutely aware of Kiera's presence beside me, her ceremonial armor gleaming under the lights, her movements perfectly controlled, yet somehow more fluid than any human could achieve. On the platform, Harrington presented me with a small, intricate badge, the Star of Alliance, Earth's highest diplomatic honor, simultaneously. Tyvek bestowed upon Kiera the Crimson Band of Valor, a rare Vexari distinction, typically reserved for those who had sacrificed themselves for their people. These heroes remind us, Harrington concluded, that courage and understanding can bridge even the widest divides between worlds. The reception continued late into the night, a curious blend of Earth's celebratory traditions and Vexari ceremonial restraint. Throughout it all, Kiera remained by my side, her presence drawing curious glances from both our peoples. Some disapproved. I could see it in the tight expressions of certain Vexari elders and the raised eyebrows of a few human officials. But many more seemed intrigued, even encouraged by our evident partnership. As the gathering finally began to disperse, Draxus approached us one last time, his expression uncharacteristically serious. I'm heading back to the outer systems tomorrow, he announced. Less politics, more profit. But if you two ever need a ride through hostile territory, he shrugged. Well, let's just say I might be persuaded to offer the Friends and Saviors of Civilization discount. We'll keep that in mind, I replied, genuinely appreciative of the offer. After he departed, Kiera and I found ourselves alone on a small observation balcony overlooking the ship's docking bay. Below us, vessels from both our fleets sat side by side, their different designs a visual reminder of our distinct evolutionary paths. What happens now? Kiera asked quietly, her gaze fixed on the ships below. Officially, we build this alliance, strengthen our defenses, prepare for the hegemony's return. I turned to face her. Unofficially, her eyes met mine, amber depths reflecting the starlight. Yes? I think we continue what we started in that cave on Zathoria, I said. Learning about each other, building bridges between our worlds, one day at a time. Kiera's hand found mine again, her skin warming against my palm. That is acceptable. Just acceptable, I teased. Her skin flushed that remarkable violet once more, but this time she didn't try to hide it. Perhaps more than acceptable. Derek Vance. The following day, we boarded a diplomatic vessel bound for Earth. Our mission, to establish the framework for a permanent alliance between our peoples. It would be challenging work, navigating centuries of cultural differences and ingrained suspicions. But as I watched Kiera preparing her formal reports, her movements precise and graceful, even in such mundane tasks, I couldn't help but feel optimistic. You're staring, she observed without looking up. Just appreciating the view, I replied unapologetically. This time, there was no slap, just a subtle darkening of her skin and the faintest curve of her lips. Progress. Indeed. As our ship accelerated toward the jump point that would take us to Earth, I found myself reflecting on the strange path that had led us here. A routine diplomatic mission, a hidden code, an accidental compliment about a warrior's posterior, all threads in a tapestry that had ultimately saved two civilizations. "What are you thinking?" Kira asked, finally setting aside her work to join me at the viewport. "I'm thinking that sometimes the most important diplomatic breakthroughs come from the most unexpected moments," I replied. "And that I'm very glad you didn't hit me quite hard enough to cause permanent damage when I complimented your butt." She made a sound that might have been a laugh, a rare enough occurrence that I treasured it immediately. "The compliment was inappropriate," she said, "but perhaps not entirely unwelcome, though your delivery could use refinement." "I'll work on that," I promised, taking her hand once more. "We have time." Beyond the viewport, stars streaked past as we headed toward Earth, the first of many journeys we would make together. The hegemony was still out there, regrouping, planning. The path ahead would not be easy. But in that moment, with Kira's hand in mine and the knowledge of what we had already accomplished together, I felt ready for whatever the galaxy might throw at us next. And if the hegemony or any other threat came for our peoples again, they would find not two separate civilizations, but a united front. All because a human diplomat couldn't help noticing that a fearsome alien warrior had a really nice butt. Who could have imagined that such an inappropriate observation would end up saving two civilizations? Sometimes, it seems, the most profound connections begin with the most human of moments. As Kira might say, when the stars change course, the river must turn. Our stars had changed. Our rivers had turned. And together, we flowed toward a future neither of us could have imagined when we first met in that dingy bar on Zathoria. And despite everything we'd been through, the danger, the betrayal, the galaxy-spanning conspiracy, I couldn't help thinking that her slap had been worth it. Completely worth it. "You're smiling again," Kira observed. "Just thinking about how we met," I admitted. "You mean when you made an inappropriate comment about my physical form, and I responded with appropriate force?" "Exactly that," I grinned. "Best diplomatic incident of my career." She shook her head, but couldn't quite hide her own smile. "Humans are strange creatures," says the warrior whose skin changes color with her emotions. "A much more efficient communication system than your mysterious expressions," she countered. "True," I conceded, "but it does make it rather difficult for you to hide when you're pleased by my compliments." Her skin predictably darkened, confirming my point. Rather than respond verbally, she simply tightened her grip on my hand, a gesture that needed no translation in either of our cultures. As our ship entered the jump sequence, the stars outside the viewport stretched and blurred into streaks of light. Much like our future, bright, fast-moving, and full of possibilities neither of us could fully predict. Whatever came next, we would face it together, the diplomat and the warrior, the human and the Vexari. An unlikely pair, united by circumstance and choice. And maybe, just maybe, by one ill-timed but ultimately fortuitous comment about a really impressive alien posterior.